heavy. Hello friends, welcome back to another video. If you happen to be new here, hello, my name is Kim. I am an author as well as an illustrator, and here on my channel I love to share about all things books, all things writing and illustration projects I'm working on, and all things about just living a cozy and intentional life. Now, I know that the year is not necessarily over, but I just couldn't wait to share some of the amazing books that I have read this year in 2024. These are memorable books for me that I just cannot stop thinking about, that were fun, that were just an all-around great time. I feel like this year was really the year that I just had fun with reading, that I invested in just reading. I mean, I didn't get to read as many books as I wanted to because I was working on writing and an illustration project, so that took a lot of my time. But when I did get to reading, I feel like I read some really amazing books and really memorable books, and I just had fun with reading. If the cover looked good, if the storyline sounded decent, I picked it up. There was no restrictions to themes or anything like that. I just read the book, and I'm so glad that I did because I was exposed to just different genres. It was just an all-around great time. One of my favorite genres to read is fantasy, and I feel like I really got lucky with the fantasy genre this year. I read a lot of amazing fantasy books. A lot of these are fantasy based, if not almost all of them, but they range from YA to adult, just different themes within the fantasy genre. I have curated some of the most memorable books that I've read this year that I just, like I mentioned, can't stop thinking about. I believe I have, I don't know, it's definitely over 10 books, maybe 13, 14, I can't remember. These are going to be in no particular order. So without further yapping, let's get into some of the most amazing books that I have read in the year of 2024. Just a quick reminder, friends, please remember to subscribe if you have not subscribed yet to my channel. Please remember to engage, comment, like, share. It really goes a long way, you doing those little things to help amplify my channel and for me to be able to continue doing the work that I do here on YouTube. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to try and go from like the beginning of the year till now. I mean, I'm still in the middle of reading books. Probably in another video, I'm going to add more to this list, or maybe I'll do like my number one best read to like my least favorite. I don't know, we'll see. So obviously this is not going to be the end of this list because I'm still in the middle of reading books right now. But I just couldn't wait to share some of these books that I've loved. The very beginning of the year, let's go back to January. I think I read this particular book in January, and I was so excited because I felt like I started the year very strong once I finished this book because it was an automatic 5-star for me, and I discovered what is one of my favorite authors, and that book is Alebrijes by Donna, Barba, Huigera. I found this book on a trip. Me and my family went to a Washington State trip for the holidays last year, and I found this in a little quaint bookstore over there. I knew exactly what Alebrijes are, so this caught my eye immediately, and I ended up buying the book. And I ended up reading this book in January, and I am so glad that I did because I immediately fell in love with the story. So in this story, we are following Leandro and his sister Gabby as well, and they live in this dystopian world or city that is called Pocatel. The old world has gone to ruin, and now in Pocatel, it's the city where supposedly they protect you from the outside world because the outside world is full of monsters. Leandro and his sister get by pickpocketing. That is how they survive, until one day his sister ends up getting caught and Leandro takes the blame for it. So because Leandro ends up taking the blame, he is taken into custody, and they are supposed to punish him of some sorts, but one of the government officials gives him an ultimatum. And the ultimatum is that if he can travel outside of Pocatel to help this government person bring her daughter back to Pocatel because she's been missing. And the way that she does this, or they do this, is they use Alebrijes. So if you don't know what Alebrijes are these beautiful mythical creatures, part of Mexican culture. So they pretty much use these robotic Alebrijes Alebrijes, and they connect your brain to this Alebrije, travel outside of Pocatel in Alebrije form, if that makes sense. So Leandro is giving this ultimatum, and he has to travel outside of Pocatel to go and find this government person daughter, and thus takes Leandro on this wild adventure outside of Pocatel. This book, oh my goodness, it was so beautiful. It has a beautiful message in here. It shines light on farm workers. It shines light on family, on found family. And it was just a beautifully told story with many meaningful messages that takes you on this grand adventure, on this grand dystopian adventure. I cannot stop thinking about this story. Now, the next book that I read that I absolutely loved is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. Now, I will say that this book was not a 5-star book for me, but that doesn't stop it from being a great book. For me, a great book is definitely a story that I just can't stop thinking about, even if it wasn't a 5-star read for me, because of maybe how it was executed, or maybe I didn't necessarily love the language or how it was written. But for me, if I can't stop thinking about it because the storyline, the story concept was just so good, then that for me, it's gonna be in this video. I believe this book was like a 3.5 star or a 4-star, I cannot remember, but I still cannot stop thinking about this story. It was creepy, it was eerie. So in this story, we are following Effie, and Effie is an architect. Not by choice. In this world, women cannot be writers or major in English, I believe. And that's what Effie wanted to do. She wanted to be a writer, but because she's a woman, she can't. That leaves her to study architecture. So she ends up getting into this sort of program where she gets accepted to go to do the architecture rework to this very famous writer's house, whom she is a huge fan of. She goes there and she ends up getting paired or meeting this other guy who is there to do the same thing as her. So that kind of follows a little romance, a little enemies to lovers sort of romance. But that's not the fun part for me. The fun part for me was all the hidden secrets that this famous writer ends up having, and also the creepiness of this house that Effie and her partner end up going to, and all the creepiness and eeriness and all the hidden secrets that are there, and finding out that this writer, this famous writer whom both of them have been huge fans of, is not necessarily who they think he is. And on top of that, there is this fairy king lurking around the shadows where they end up going to the famous writer's house. All in all, this book gave me the shivers. It is based in, I believe, like a coastal sea area, and the way that Ava Reid writes is just so lyrical, so beautiful. It really immerses you into the story, and I think that's why this story is so memorable for me, because I feel like I was there. Everything she was describing, I literally felt it all around me. The dampness, the mistiness, just the wetness of this place that she was describing. It made you feel so immersed into the storyline, and that is what I absolutely loved about this book. Now, the next book that is very memorable to me and that I absolutely loved this year, I actually read this in audiobook format, and that is The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This book, you guys, it was a very quick read. I believe the audiobook was only like 5 hours. In those 5 hours, it did so much that other books have not done as far as story goes, as far as just being very moving. And I just cannot stop thinking about this story. In this story, we are following our main protagonist, whose name is Yetu. And Yetu lives underwater. They are what some would call a mermaid, but that is not what they are called in this story. They are actually called the Wajinru. They are water-dwelling descendants of pregnant African slave women who were thrown overboard by slavers who live idyllic lives in the deep. So there's a huge community of Wajinru who live underwater, who live in the deep. So our main protagonist, Yetu, has a very important role for her community. She is in charge of keeping all the memories of everyone in her community, all the memories of the descendants that came before her. She stores them in her memories, and it's a sort of, I guess you would say, power or leadership that the community chooses for someone in particular to have. So Yetu is this person. She is in charge of holding all the memories of their African descendants who came before them, because it's important to preserve what happened. For Yetu, this causes a lot of pain, and she is not allowed to share these stories with her community. She is supposed to just store them, because the whole point is that they're very painful and they don't want the entire community to know about them. Because of this, Yetu ends up escaping her community. She leaves far away, trying to escape the bad memories, the history of her people, because it holds a lot of pain and she can't hold on to that anymore. And so this escape really sort of brings her closer to herself, and she discovers more about herself and more about her people and the importance of preserving these memories. This book was so poetic in all the beautiful ways. It was very emotional. I cannot stop thinking about it, and I won't stop thinking about it for years to come. And it's definitely one of those books that I would read again over and over, like probably every year. The next book that I ended up reading in audiobook format sometime, I don't know, February, March, I can't remember. And that is Blood Debts by Terry Benton Walker. If you know me, you know that I love a good witchy book. And this book was that and so much more. I feel like Blood Debts was one of those books that reminded me of all those old shows that I really loved watching when I was like a teen and in my early 20s, such as Vampire Diaries, Teen Wolf, The Secret Circle, all those shows. I feel like I really enjoyed this book because it reminded me of that. And some might say that those shows are kind of corny, but I personally love them, okay? And this book was so in line with those shows. So Blood Debts is a fantasy YA book, I believe, and it follows a family of witches. And in particular, it follows two siblings who are also twins, whose names are Clement and Christina. They come from a big family of witches who have always been on a throne. There's like thrones in this world. The cool thing that I really love about this is that it's based in New Orleans, Louisiana. And if you've gone to New Orleans, you know how magical that city is. So it follows Clement and Christina, who are sort of in a pickle because their family's throne was stolen by this other family of witches. About 30 years ago, the throne was stolen from their great-grandma or great-grandma. It was stolen in a very unfair way where they were accused of something that they didn't do. Fast forward to present day, Christina and Clement are faced with the realities or the consequences of what those events were. Their father has now been unalived and their mother has fallen very, very ill. And so it's up to Clement and Christina to sort of fight for their family and preserve their legacy, because it's their magic, their family's legacy, their throne has all been and is being taken all away in a very unjust way. It's sort of like wars between witch families. I really love the magical system. If you are someone who loves New Orleans, if you love witches, power dynamics, I highly recommend Blood Debts. I think the second installation of this book came out this year. I have yet to pick it up, but it's definitely a book that I'm going to be reading in 2025. Next book that I read that I found it super unserious, super funny, and just like a good, relaxing time that I cannot stop thinking about is That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. Now, this is another book that wasn't necessarily a 5-star read for me, but it was one of those books that I really enjoyed because it made me laugh. It had some spicy scenes, and it was just like so unserious. And sometimes we need a very unserious book to just have a good time with. And because that book did that for me, it became memorable. Like I still know everything that happened. I'm still laughing about it today. I love Kimberly Lemming's very unserious and funny writing style. In this story, we are following our main character whose name is Cinnamon. And Cinnamon is a spice farmer or a cinnamon farmer. I can't remember. One day as she's coming home drunk from the bar, she ends up running into a demon, or a demon actually falls on her. And the demon sort of forces her to go on this trip with him to go and look for this witch who apparently has enslaved all of his people. So Cinnamon unwillingly has to go with him, and thus starts a huge voyage where they come across towns and people who are very interesting, and starts a little romance with this very evil demon. I know this is a whole series. I haven't read the other ones. I think there's like there's like two or three more in the installation, which I also want to collect. But this was fun. This series is definitely going to be my go-to when I just want something that I don't need to think too hard on, something that I just don't want to take too seriously, and to just have a really relaxing time with. Next book that I read, I actually read this on, I believe, my Kindle, and that is Faebound by Saara El-Arifi. You guys, okay, so this is an adult fantasy novel. I would say that this book is more high fantasy, so it definitely took a little bit more of my brain to think and really concentrate on what was happening, the events that were going on. But you guys, this book was so good, or at least for me. I really loved all of the elements in this book. So in this story, we are following Euron. Euron is the leader of this army for the elves. So something happens in this war that Euron is going to that gets her exiled from her people. She's thrown into the wilderness to go live out her days. As she's out into the wilderness, she ends up coming across a group of people who end up being Fae. And these Fae folks take her to their world, to their place, to their city, whatever you want to call it, and she is super stunned because she thought that there were no more of these kind of people. Actually, not to think about it, I think in the beginning she was going into war, or the elven army was going into war with another elven army, because I believe that the Fae were already executed, like all of them. So when Euron ends up getting exiled, she is super stunned to find Fae, because the Fae were supposed to be executed, all of them. So she ends up going with the Fae, and thus she is introduced to this whole world that she didn't know was even there. Euron also has a little sister whose name is Lettle. Lettle is a seer. She sees the future. Lettle ends up going after her sister to go and try and bring her back. And so they both sort of get sucked into this Fae world where there is so much magic. There are a lot of sort of rules to this place. There are magical creatures, which was one of my favorite parts. I really love the execution of the magical creature in this storyline. It gave me like Avatar vibes. You know, the animals in Avatar where they connect to these flying, what are they, like sort of birds? They connect to them through their braid. It was like a moment like that for Faebound. It reminded me of Avatar like that. And I found it so magical. I love a good magical, mythical creature. There were also a lot of like wow moments in this storyline that took me by surprise. Definitely things that I didn't see coming, that I was like shook, that had me pause and put the book down and be like, whoa, what? That for me is always a good sign. I ended up giving this book a 5 stars because for me, it was just great. I was super invested in the storyline and I just cannot wait for the second book, because the way that this book ended, I was just, my jaw was on the floor. All right, moving on to the next book, because I think I still have like 7 more books I want to share. It is a graphic novel, and that is Lightfall, The Girl in the Goldrian by Tim Probert. If you didn't know, I love reading graphic novels. I blab about this all the time here to my community. I love a good graphic novel. I truly believe that more adults need to read graphic novels. It just gives you a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of just magic. And I feel like more adults need that, because we tend to lose a lot of that the more that we grow older. For me, graphic novels gives me that. So we're being introduced to the world of Urpa. I believe that is what this world is called, or this city. And we are following our main protagonist, whose name is Bee. Bee is this little, I think she's like 13-year-old little girl who lives with her, is it her uncle or her grandpa? Her grandpa, who is a pig wizard. He brews up tinctures and potions, and he's a healer, and Bee helps him. And they live together in this little quaint cottage house in the middle of nowhere. And this pig wizard, Bee's grandfather, has also a very important role. He is a keeper of the endless flame, which is a very important thing in this world. One day, the pig wizard leaves the house without any explanation to B while B was out. He ends up leaving a note for her saying that he's gone and he's gonna go somewhere and to not go look for him. And here is the endless flame. You need to guard it. In that same instance, B was out collecting whatever her grandfather told her to go collect, and she meets Cad. And Cad is a member of the Goldrians. The Goldrians are a race of creatures who were thought to have gone extinct. And Cad is looking for his people, and he believes that the pig wizard is the only one that can help him. And so B and Cad are together in that moment, and so they decide to go and look for the pig wizard. B in hopes to obviously be with her grandfather, and Cad because he wants the pig wizard's help to look for his people. So of course they set off in this huge voyage where they meet very interesting and particular people and a lot of malicious people who are also off after the endless flame. And of course B had to take the endless flame with her because she's supposed to safeguard it. The thing that I really loved about this book is that we follow a character who is B, who suffers from panic attacks and anxiety. And I feel like this graphic book, it does a beautiful portrayal of what a panic attack or anxiety or nervousness feels like. The author does such a great job in not only portraying that in illustration format, but also in the verbiage that they use and showing the reader how to work through a panic attack. I just found it so beautiful, and I feel like it has such a beautiful message. Of course, the story is a story of a voyage and found family, and it has a lot of cool fantasy elements, but also has a beautiful message about mindfulness and about mental health and working through our anxieties. Another graphic novel that I read this year that was just so fun, also very unserious, and just a good time that I cannot stop thinking about. That is The Princess and the Grilled Cheese Sandwich by Deya Muniz. This book, you guys, so unserious, so funny, and grilled cheese? Such a random food, but so funny and so fitting for this storyline. So in this story, we are following our main character whose name is Lady Camberbert. Lady Camberbert has to do all the royal things that a woman is expected to do, and that is to marry, have kids, the whole ordeal. So when her father dies, she takes that opportunity to flee her home and disguise herself as Count Camberbert, living as a man in the next city. So of course she has to keep up with her disguise, that way she is not found, but for her that is kind of hard to do because she ends up falling for Princess Bree, which is a princess she ends up meeting through social gatherings and whatnot. Bree and Cam start a little romance. They fall for each other through the love of grilled cheese, and there is a lot of hidden truths that come to light, and it's just a really cute story and lots of grilled cheese. Moving on to our next book that I cannot stop thinking about is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibañez. This book, you guys, I did not expect to love this book as much as I loved it. If you want to go on a huge adventure full of archaeology and history, then this is the book for you. So this book is set in the 19th century, and it follows Bolivian Argentinian Inés Olivera, who belongs to the upper society in Buenos Aires. And Inés is a lover of archaeology. Her parents are both archaeologists, and they study archaeology in Egypt, and they constantly go to Egypt. They spend half of the year in Egypt studying archaeology, and Inés doesn't like that. She is always getting left behind. She would love to go with her parents, but they always have her stay in Buenos Aires. So one day Inés gets the news that her parents have tragically passed away in an accident, and so Inés is left with her parents' fortune, and also she ends up getting left with this also archaeologist. Is it an archaeologist? She ends up getting left with a mysterious guardian, an archaeologist in partnership with his Egyptian brother-in-law. Trying to find out what happened to her parents, Inés ends up traveling all the way to Egypt to try and find answers to what happened to her parents. What she comes across is quite the adventure. She ends up meeting her distant uncle. She ends up finding a lot of secrets, a lot of hidden truths about what happened to her parents, and the magic that is embedded in these objects that her parents studied in Egypt is just stunning. This book really put into perspective how much I actually truly enjoy historical fiction. I thought I wasn't a historical fiction girly, and this book really showed me how much I love reading about history through very magical storytelling. So this really did that for me. All right, moving on to our next book. This book was my first book that I read from this author, and this really set the stage for another author that I really feel like is going to be one of my all-time favorite authors as well going forward, and that is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. As much as I love fantasy and graphic novels and very like non-serious books as well, S.T. Gibson really does something with her writing that is very atmospheric and very dark and eerie that I very much enjoy. In this story, we are following our main protagonist, whose name is Constanza, and Constanza is pretty much the first bride of Dracula. Dracula ended up transforming Constanza to be his wife, and thus Constanza is wrapped up into Dracula's very dark and mischievous world. Constanza ends up falling in love with Dracula. For centuries, they live together. She truly believes that she knows the person that he is, or the monster that he is. That is until Dracula ends up being involved with an aristocrat. And that is when Constanza really realizes the kind of monster that he is, all the deceit and the lies and the manipulation. Constanza ends up taking comfort in another woman that Dracula has taken to bed, and they sort of form like an alliance and they fall in love with each other. They end up planning to overthrow Dracula to bring his life to light. And so this storyline really takes you through their whole love triangle, and I really love how this story was told. It kind of feels like letters in a sense, coming from Constanza herself. Because the story is told in a first person perspective, it very much does feel like it is being told through a wave of letters, and I really enjoyed that because you can really see through Constanza's eyes and what she's going through and all the suffering that she's going through after decades and centuries of living with Dracula and his manipulative ways. Definitely an eerie book, but truly the highlight for me of this book was how it was written. It was very memorable. I really enjoyed this book. All right, friends, we're down to our last 3 books. Moving on, the next book that I absolutely loved this year that I read is actually a middle grade novel, and that is Ravenfall by Kalyn Josephson. I read this for the fall season, and you guys, so magical. 10 out of 10, highly recommend if you just want a cute, cozy, sort of Halloween town vibes, full of magic, and just a good all-around fun time. Highly recommend Ravenfall. This is actually a whole series as well. So in this story, we are following 13-year-old Anna Balinki, and Anna is a psychic. Her whole family is psychic, and Anna and her family run an inn, the Ravenfall Inn. All of Anna's family, they all have some sort of psychic ability. I believe Anna can, if she touches you, she can see the future or something that's about to happen. So one day, this boy ends up showing up at the Ravenfall Inn, whose name is Kalyn. And Kalyn was told to go to the Ravenfall Inn if there was an emergency. And in this case, there was. His parents were unalived, and his brother is now missing because he went after the killers. So Kalyn ends up going to the Ravenfall Inn in hopes that maybe his brother is there, or if he can get some help from whoever runs the inn. Anna takes it upon herself to try and help Kalyn look for his brother or see what happened to his parents. And so that takes them on a whole adventure all through the Ravenfall town. And it just so happens that this is also happening during October, which makes it extra spooky and magical. I found this book super entertaining, super magical, and it was just a good time. I felt like I was watching one of those kids' spooky movies that I used to watch like on Disney Channel when I was a kid. That's how this felt, and it was just so nostalgic. I absolutely adored it. Moving on to the next book that I read this year that I just cannot stop thinking about. This is actually a book that I read with my patrons. If you didn't know, I do have a Patreon, and I also run a book club there. We are called the Storykeepers Society Book Club, and we read this book, cannot remember, I think we read this in September maybe, but that is A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. Also Huge fan of Kingfisher. I love their writing style. Super, super poetic. Just great writing, very lyrical. So of course I had to pick up their newest book that came out this year, A Sorceress Comes to Call. This is a fairy tale retelling of the Brothers Grimm's story Goose Girl. I have not read Goose Girl from the Brothers Grimm, but this is supposed to be based around that or loosely inspired by that. So in this story, we are following our main protagonist whose name is Cordelia. And Cordelia has a mother who is very unusual. She is what some would call a witch. And she has powers. She can pretty much control your mind. So she has mind control powers. Cordelia's mother is very abusive and evil to Cordelia. One day, Cordelia and her mother end up leaving this town that they're from in hopes that Cordelia's mother can find a man who she can marry or otherwise use mind control powers on him to marry her. They end up finding this family who Cordelia's mother can sort of manipulate into staying with and thus making the guy of this family fall in love with her. Cordelia, of course, doesn't agree with any of the things that her mother does. She feels very bad that her mother is actually trying to manipulate this family that they came across with, who now they're staying with. And so she tries in subtle ways to tell the sister of brother whom Cordelia's mom is trying to make fall in love with her. Cordelia is trying to hint at that her mother is not good. And so she ends up getting help from the sister of the brother to help her stop her mom from the manipulation that she's doing. So this book is set during like the Regency time when there's a lot of courting going on, and witches are not that common in this world. So it takes Cordelia a while to try and convince the sister of the brother that this is happening. At last, she ends up convincing her, and they have to take it upon themselves to stop Cordelia's mother, who is very powerful. And on top of that, she has an ally, or a horse ally, who is not truly a horse, but some other creature disguised as a horse. This book was so creepy and eerie. The writing really is so vivid that it makes it extra creepy. And because of that, this is a very memorable story. And I think honestly, any Kingfisher story will always be very memorable for me because of how she writes. All right, friends, and now the last book that I want to talk about that I read this year that is so memorable for me, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. So The Only Good Indians follows 4 American Indian men after a disturbing event that happened in their youth. These 4 friends hunted down a deer in their youth and ended up having some repercussions up until now that they're adults. This entity of this deer ends up haunting them, which makes them believe that it wasn't so a deer that they killed, but something else. So now that these 4 men are adults, they end up being haunted by the entity of this deer. They are seeing things, they are hearing things, and thus leads into what can be the end of their own lives. The way that this creature follows these men or haunts them, in a way it makes you empathize with the creature that was unalived, but also it makes you fear for your life the way that it is haunting and hunting down these 4 men. I believe Stephen Graham Jones does such a great job in invoking fear and horror to the storyline. I never knew that I would be so afraid of my life of a deer, and it just so happens that I am, or that I was when I read this book. That being said, this was a memorable book, a storyline that I cannot stop thinking about and that it still scares me till today. All right, friends, those were all of the books, all, I don't know, 13, 14, I don't know how many I mentioned in this video, that are books that I read this year in 2024 that are just so memorable and I cannot stop thinking about. These are definitely books that I'm going to be recommending to my friends, to family members, to folks on here. Definitely not all 5-star reads, but definitely books that all each and just individually that had their own pros to them that made them very memorable to me. I would love to know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books. Let me know what your thoughts were. Let me know if you've added any of these books to your 2025 TBR. Comment those down below, friends. Thank you so much for joining me here. If you watched the end of this video, all my gratitude to you. Thank you for being here. Remember, friends, that you can create the life that you want because you so deserve it. I will be seeing you in another video very, very soon. Take care and bye for now.